Hey, listeners, I want to let you know about two opportunities with Gotham Writers Workshop. Gotham Writers Workshop has been very supportive to Memoir Nation. I'm happy to say that I've taken Gotham workshops in the past, and I just had a great experience. And of note, coming up in March, Gotham Writers Workshop is hosting, both on Zoom and in person in New York City, a conference that's really tailor-made for you, memoir writers and nonfiction writers alike. And the weekend will consist of panels on publishing and Q&A sessions and agent pitching roundtables in which you'll be able to present your writing directly to literary agents. And so to learn more about the Gotham Writers Nonfiction Conference, visit gothamwriters.com/conference. That's gothamwriters.com/conference. And to sweeten the deal, Gotham is offering you an affiliate code for a discount on their classes. So use code Memoir Nation, all one word, Memoir Nation at checkout for $40 off your first 6 or 10-week class. Some restrictions apply. And tell them Brooke and Grant sent you. Hello, writers of tough life stories, livers of tough life stories, and survivors in all forms. I want to welcome you to today's podcast because it's a really important subject. And strangely, although it affects a disturbingly high number of Americans or people around the world, actually, I sometimes think we sweep it under the rug as a culture. You know, we make it invisible, even though it's all too present. And I'm talking about poverty. You know, I'm talking about the parents who might work 2 to 3 different minimum wage paying jobs and still be what is now called food insecure, which is just hungry, really hungry, and hungry every day. And we talk a lot about the haves and the have-nots since we have so many billionaires these days who love their money more than they love helping people. So we tend to focus, I think, a lot of attention on the inequity caused by the 1% because it's just so maddening and unfair. But I think we also need to talk more about the poor, you know, whose lives are perhaps more unfathomable to those of us who are fortunate enough not to question if we're going to, you know, eat tomorrow or next week. And those of us who, you know, take going on a vacation and getting a hotel room or eating a restaurant meal for granted. And Brooke, I forgot to introduce you. I'm here with Brooke Warner,
everyone.
My co-host. She's here. I'm not solo this week, thank God. But I've done a bunch of research while reading this book, and I have a bunch of statistics that tell an alarming story about poverty in America. But we both know that stories speak louder than statistics. So I'm happy that we have Suzette Partido on the show today because her memoir, Love Will Save Us Right, right with a question mark. It's quite a journey through poverty and taking care of neurodivergent sons and needy family members to boot. And so I thought we could situate ourselves personally a bit in this conversation, Brooke, you know, of income and privilege. So I'm curious, how would you describe your general class positioning in the world? And do you have a moment where you felt most in need of money?
Yeah, it's a good and hard question, Grant. You know, I want to say out loud, or I guess like preface by saying that I read somewhere that most people position themselves in a class that's actually the one below where they are, and that some of that self-definition is driven by fear that we're falling or that we're one step away from being the next rung down on that socioeconomic ladder. So it's definitely an interesting question. And I think also kind of hard to answer if you're in an upper echelon because guilt can be attached to that. Embarrassment could sometimes be attached to that because I think I've grown up solidly middle class, but then in retrospect and also in comparison, I think I would have to say, you know, that I've been between middle class and upper middle class and would probably qualify myself as upper middle class today, in part because I own a home. And I think that has made a really big difference for my security. And so it's just something interesting to think about. But I have had moments of money insecurity, you know, like when I was a young waitress, when I started in book publishing and I was making like seriously, I think $16 or $17 an hour. And I was always felt like I was being very scrappy, you know, and living in apartments and all of that stuff, which a lot of people are in their 20s go through. But of course, I always had my parents to fall back on. So I guess it's a mosaic, but by comparison to someone who has been, you know, truly food unsafe, I just have never even experienced that. And at the same time, I think it's, you know, it can be very hard to talk about money when you don't feel like you have a lot or when you feel like you just have enough, you know, to get you through, you know, like the next couple of months, let's say if I were out of work all of a sudden. So it's just interesting to think about. But I'm wondering, the same for you. I'll lob it back to you.
Well, Brooke, thanks for the question. I just wanted to point out that you actually said food unsafe instead of food insecure. And
right.
we hope the food is at least safe with all the insecurity and hunger around it. But food insecure or insecure, I think it's a new term and one I'm certainly getting used to. And to answer your question, it's interesting what you said about this difference between saying you're one class or another, and most times people are going lower. Because I think this is my answer, essentially. Like I grew up middle class, but I think in the context of this small Iowa town, I was really upper middle class. And I know that I've benefited tremendously from that place of privilege. And when I read books like Suzette's, I think, oh my God, I've had it so easy. And, on certain levels, that you don't really think about being about money, but I think I've been able to take the risks I've taken in my life, meaning, first and foremost, the decision to become a writer, because I've always felt there was a safety net underneath me, so I could fail and I could fall and I would basically be all right because somehow my parents would be there. And, my parents grew up in poverty, though. My father's parents didn't go to school beyond the 9th grade because they had to work on their family farms. And I heard stories from my mother about how my grandmother, who was a solo farmer without help, but she would, during winter storms, she'd hold baby pigs in her arms and stay up with them all night just to keep them alive, which was both for their food, but also for their income. And, I remember one other story my mom told me where she traded some of their farm produce with the owner of a clothing store in her town just to be able to buy a dress to go to a school dance. So all these things are things I never really experienced and took for granted. And my dad was the first in his family to go to college, and he went to law school. And so even though I came from this small town without much glamour, I was a child of a professional, and I never truly wanted for anything. And I don't truly know the meaning of poverty. In my early days as a writer, like you, Brooke, I worked in a bookstore, and I remember living on like $100 a week for a while. And I experienced a lot of low paying jobs. I remember when I first moved to San Francisco, I was earning $15,000 a year roughly as a waiter. Back then, fortunately, burritos were really cheap and I could eat pretty well. But I can remember a couple times when I sold plasma to make some extra money. But those experiences, they don't really describe true poverty, because I always had a way out. And even when I was earning so little as a waiter, I ate most of my meals at the restaurant I worked in, and I never worried about being hungry or food insecure or food unsafe even.
Right. It's funny when like the wrong words make their way in sometimes, but it's kind of got me thinking about what it means to be food unsafe and food insecure at the same time. And one thing that interests me so much about Suzette's memoir, our guest today, is how she's quite accomplished professionally in the nonprofit world. After working over 2 decades as the education director for a mental health organization, she retired to care for her autistic teenage son who needed more attention than she'd been able to provide. And then, while she was considering this idea to be her healthiest employment move, it also really proved to be financially disastrous. And then her struggles to make ends meet took a toll on her son. All of this is just intense to see how quickly this downward spiral goes from being like you're okay or it's kind of tenuous to, like I just said, disastrous. And she's a deeply committed caretaker of people, whether it's her neurodivergent son or her very mean and stingy aunt who pays her next to nothing to take care of her. And then she privileges taking care of her people, over making the money that she might make. And she manages to balance this very interesting two perspectives, of being motherly, but also subversive. And I also wanted to comment on the tone of the book, because it's not self-pitying. You can see that in her interview when she comes on too. Like, she's not demanding or full of social critiques. Instead, she's just saying, this is my story. It's not a manifesto. And she's wanting to engage her readers in an easy intimacy, and brings a lot of humor into the mix, which you'll also hear in the interview. And she does make us feel her situation. I mean, I think that's the biggest outcome for me, is like, it's almost impossible to look at something like this and not have a moment of humility, for where you sit in the world. And Grant, earlier you said you did some research on poverty in America. I know it's not a good story. Basically, like you're a hero or even a superhero if you escape the cycle of poverty, because there is just so little support. So I think it would be really interesting if you could tell us a bit more about what you uncovered.
Yeah, there's a big part of me that hates to tell a story with statistics, but I don't know how else to tell it on a broad societal level. And as I said earlier, I think sometimes we sweep poverty under the rug and pay attention to other issues more or in a different way. And the data I found, reveals that poverty in America is not just about the total number of people affected, but about, racial disparities and geographic concentration and working poor who don't qualify for assistance, and then just, policies can actually make a dramatic difference, especially for children. So here's some numbers. So consider this. In 2024, 13.4% of children, which is about 10 million, lived in households with incomes below the poverty threshold, which is about $32,000 for a family of 4 with 2 children. So if you think about that number, it's actually greater than the population of 11 individual states. So imagine a whole state with super poor children. What's worse is the child poverty rate has risen dramatically. It was just 5.2% in 2021, not too long ago, and 13.7% in 2023, more than doubling. And when I mentioned policies earlier, that's largely due to the expiration of the enhanced child tax credit. So we're basically a society that's fine on some level with millions of children growing up in poverty. And in Suzette's memoir, food insecurity is a big issue, and they have to go to food banks for food. And in 2023, 13.5% of U.S. households, which is 18 million people, that were food insecure at some time during the year, and that's going up too. It was 12.8% in 2022. And about 5.1%, 6.8 million of households experienced very low food security, where normal eating patterns, they were disrupted, food intake was reduced, sometimes people didn't eat all day. So, this term food insecure, which I prefer just hungry, like really hungry. And so 14 million children in the United States live in a state of hunger, and they're going to school in a state of hunger, which affects their learning, affects a lot of things, obviously, and they're not living a healthy life as a result.
Those statistics are so troubling, beyond troubling. And yet, because they're statistics, it can be really hard for us to take in what that means for human beings who are represented by those numbers, because our brains really aren't wired to relate to statistics on an emotional level, which is why I'm so thankful for memoirs like Suzette's, because they're telling the stories behind the stats. Before we bring her on, I do want to speak to another angle of poverty that's important to mention, and that's the place of race in this discussion. It's just speaking to a couple more statistics that you actually shared with me, Grant. In 2024, Black, Hispanic, and American Indian, Alaska Native children all experienced poverty at a rate 3 times that of white children. Rates of food insecurity were higher for Black households by 23.3%, and then Latinx households by 21.9%. So pretty sobering, Grant.
Definitely. And I wish we all could kind of more emotionally interpret those numbers. It's hard to tell this story, but you use the phrase beyond troubling. And I'm beyond troubled by this, getting back to the 1%, because I think we focus a lot on the 1%, and we can focus more because they deserve it. But for instance, when Jeff Bezos had his wedding in Venice that got so much press attention, it's estimated they actually spent about $50 million on a single wedding.
Gross.
Yeah. And I just started to question whether we should find a different way to think about that. So I'm kind of like statistics. And so I was sitting around one day and thinking that, maybe we should convert lavish expenses like that into actual human lives. And I did some research on the minimum amount of money that it takes to save a life, which is actually very low. There's a nonprofit, I'm forgetting the name, but they estimated that $5,000 could save a life. And so I don't know how that sum was configured. So I put a dollar amount much higher. I said that if you spent $100,000 per person, which seems feasible, you could save a life for $100,000 or feed a family like Suzette's, as we'll see, for several years. So in this configuration, Jeff Bezos' wedding cost about 500 people's lives. We often don't think about the consequences of the extravagances of lives, but there are consequences to the inequities in our world, and most of us are shielded from realizing them or even viewing them.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that we're wrangling with this. We do need more stories like Suzette's to understand the day-to-day life behind these statistics of families that are being devastated because their breadwinners are being carted off and kidnapped. And we have a lot to reckon with in this country. And I continue to believe, and I know you share this thought with me, Grant, that stories is one of the best ways to reach people on a heart level and to begin to affect change. So grateful for this interview, and we will be back with Suzette after this short break.
Well, Brooke, since listeners can't see us, I rarely compliment you on your attire or your keen fashion sense, but today I'm going to make an exception. And I got to say, that is one stylish t-shirt you're wearing. Just for our listeners' sake, it says, I was there at word one, Memoir Nation. And we also have another shirt, and I'm going to buy this one for you as a gift. And it says, OM, Original Memoirist. And I'm buying it for you because you are an original memoirist in my book, because you not only helped educate me about the genre, but you co-founded Memoir Nation, of course, which I want to let listeners know they should join to take part in our writing challenge to write 500 words each day this month. And you can still join us. Please join us and join a whole community of encouraging writers.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. I want to just say I'll take the compliment. It is a pretty spiffy t-shirt after all. It's a t-shirt we made to honor all of those memoirists who have joined us to help launch Memoir Nation and who are doing Jan Your Story. And there are several variations, in fact. So I really like this one. I was here at word one because it's kind of a memento to celebrate our beginnings. And I'm going to post a photo of it so people can see it. We'll put it on our social media. And it's a collector's item, of course. I mean, it says 2025, so we've already, launched and we're out there in the world. And then we have mugs and hoodies. We even have a hip pack. So there's going to be more merch to come. And we hope people will come check out our store, which you can access through our website.
Yeah, it's true. These items are likely to fetch hundreds of dollars in years to come on eBay. So buy them, preserve them, keep them in vintage condition.
Mintage condition.
Mintage condition. I like that. And I actually bought T-shirts for my whole family. And we don't do the family and matching pajamas photo for our Christmas card. So I'm thinking maybe we'll do the family of memoirists next year.
I love that. And I want to say before we end this little ad spot that the shirt is comfortable. Thank God. That was what I was waiting for. I was really nervous that it was going to be scratchy, but it is good cotton. Yay to the company that makes them. So listeners, buy a shirt, buy a mug, buy a hip pack, but more than that, keep writing. I can't tell you how galvanizing Jan Your Story has been this month. It has been an invitation to write to hundreds of writers. I have written, I have to confess, not every single day, but on the days that I haven't written, I have caught up the next day. So I have been watering my underwatered memoir. I'm seeing it grow, which feels like a relief after all of these months. So we encourage you to go to the Memoir Nation website, click on the Jan Your Story tab. It is definitely not too late to join. You can even join on January 30th, and you could still write for 2 days, and we'd be super happy to see you there.
Even the 31st.
Absolutely.
And remember, it's free because we want to open the doorway to everyone's story, because your story matters. We'll see you at Memoir Nation.
Oh, and if you want to get a shirt, you can find that on the website too. Just go to store and see you there.
Good sales.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
I am really happy to introduce Suzette Partido, who has worked as a community developer and nonprofit organizer for 3 decades. She trained as an AIDS chaplain, street outreach worker, substance abuse counselor, reproductive health educator, volunteer coordinator, and public speaker, a lot of things. She served a large urban liberal congregation for more than 13 years, and before retiring, managed an HHSA community liaison for children's public behavioral health, and served as the director of education for a local affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. She lives with her neurodivergent young adult son and her wife inside a 10 by 10 canvas tent in her mother's backyard in San Diego, California. Welcome, Suzette.
Thank you.
I was very intrigued by the title of your memoir, Love Will Save Us, Right? It intrigues me because it's both affirming and negating at the same time. It's hopeful yet not sure. And so I was wondering how you decided on this title, and as a way to introduce your book to listeners, how does this title frame your book and the stories you tell within it?
That's an excellent question. And titling it, the book began just as an essay, and it developed from there, and it became larger and larger. And when we got around to the point of working with the title, I really had no idea on what to do. So I just asked the people who had been my frontline readers, give me some ideas. And I sent the titles of all the chapters, and some people came back. And I think it was actually Elaine, who was the editor with City Lights, pulled that out. It was either she or my friend Roy, but it really stood for kind of the emotion or the experience of writing the book, because it's like, yeah, love will save us, right? That emphasis is on the right. That's me, because I will tell my kid to the dying day, love will save us. And do I absolutely 100% believe that? I hope so. I think so, right?
Yeah.
So that's really, it kind of embodied both of those things for me. That's interesting that you should ask that.
Well, Suzette, I'd like to get a little farther into the story for listeners who aren't familiar with it. The book is about a challenging topic and experiences that you've gone through, and we've unpacked it a little bit in the banter before you came on. But it also has a very upbeat quality to it. You're not asking for sympathy. You're just telling your story of trying to take care of your family. And it was really illuminating, in part because parenting, of course, is tough no matter what. But personally, I've not experienced the kinds of challenges that you've gone through. And I wondered, for the sake of contextualizing your story, you might tell our listeners about a particularly low point in the story and how you highlighted that in the book.
Sure, I'd be happy to. One of the interesting things about the book, so it is my story, and it's my story as considering parenthood and becoming a parent and living a family life, and just, I don't use the word crazy a lot, but oftentimes things are just wild, and my family is wild. This happened at a time, the writing happened at a time where I really needed to reflect. And I used the only alone time that I had to write, which was when my small family was sleeping. So it was a very solitary experience right in the middle of the nest. And as a parent, my son and I, we read together every single night from age 2 up until high school, when things got really difficult. And he stopped reading, which broke my heart because he loved to read, and he just would not do it at all. And he said at one point, he said, I'll read again when you write a book. And I thought, oh yeah, right. Well, I wrote a book, right? And it is about him in some respect, but it's my story. And one of the conversations I had with Amy Scholder, one of the editors who actually pulled this book out of me, she said, now, are you okay with all of this story? Are you okay? Because people will be reading about your loved ones. And at that point, I had not gendered him at all. It was just a they, them kind of thing throughout the book. And it was very awkward. But, I thought about it, and I talked to most of them, not everybody. And we were okay with that. So did I expect him to read the book? Not really. Guess what? He's reading it. And I thought, I hope you like it, because it's already on the shelves. And he likes it. And it's interesting because one of the chapters is about a very low point that we had. And this was before we both knew that he was on the autism spectrum. We knew that he had depression and anxiety, and it was periodic explosiveness in our household, like walking on landmines emotionally. It was a hard time. And he turned to me actually just last night and he said, were you really thinking about going off the bridge? And it was not that I was thinking about driving off the bridge, although I was cinematically. It was that it was such a hard time. And I know it was like super hard for me, but it was like a million times harder for him because he didn't have context. And I had at least some inkling of context. So that was just a little bit about a difficult point in our lives, but also, he remembered a lot of things too. Like when he asked me, I'm afraid I'm going to be homeless and talking to myself when I'm grown up. He remembers that conversation. So we're able to go back and really talk about that stuff. So it's interesting. I didn't know what I expected on this side of the writing, but I'm watching it unfold, and it's really interesting. And there's feels there. It feels.
Suzette, somehow we're connected in some sort of parallel universe structure right now, because you queued up my exact next question,
okay,
which was this conversation that you had with your child about being homeless, or the fear of that. And so you name him Kid in this dialogue. So I'll name it Kid and then me, which is your part of it. And he said, the homeless people on the street that talk to themselves? You say, yes. I'm afraid that I'm going to end up like that. You say, you're afraid that you're going to end up a homeless person on the street that talks to themselves? Right. And then you say, that must be very scary. And he says, will I end up like that? You say, no. Really? You will never, ever be alone, and you will never, ever be without help. Really? Yes, really. Thanks, he says. And then he goes to sleep. But what was interesting about that conversation, it kind of mirrors the title, like love will save us, right? Like you won't be homeless talking to yourself, right? And so can you go a little bit deeper into that, like living in that state of uncertainty, I guess?
Wow, that's where we are. That's where we are right now. And I can't seem to figure out how to get out of it other than to just notice like how it's kind of like I envision a very large sandbox filled with wet cement. Right. So how we move through how I move through my day emotionally and with hope and with energy is hard because I'm stuck in this wet cement. But I have a huge responsibility because I love my family so much. I can feel my eyes welling up. But, I have a young adult who's on the spectrum, who is just absolutely dynamic and charming and worthwhile and fantastic, and is terrified every fucking day. He is just terrified, like, are they coming for me next? And he also knows that he is so fortunate and privileged and blessed because we have food, we have electricity, we have a safe place to sleep, we have pets that we can feed, and right now everybody that we love is alive and we're together. And it's not going to be like that all the time, but right now it is. So I want to juice that for all I can and can it and freeze dry it and stick it in a Ziploc and just make sure that there's some of it left for when I am gone, so that he can move on and whoever's in his life at that time can have hope also. So I don't know. I feel great hope, but I'm also terrified. So it's a balance. And I'm not sure how to manage that other than to rely on just using words, how to use your words. So I'm trying to talk about it, but I don't know. I wish that it wasn't so, yes, we're going to be good, right? But that I can't get rid of that right part because that's where we are.
That's really powerful stuff that you're covering in this book and in your life too. And I wanted to note that sometimes you have to break the rules in order to live. That seems to be a refrain. And one of the moments of breakthrough or joy that you experience as a family comes when you throw your son's homework out the window and you say, keeping our household mentally well was more important than writing a book report. So I was wondering if you could talk to us about how important it was to make your own rules for your family, and did you learn to give yourself permission to make your own rules?
We had to give ourselves.
Or how did you, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, we ran out of options, really. And it was at a time where we were trying to live together as a blended family in one big house. And that was so not working out. It was a disaster on all fronts. So we were focused on trying to swim to the other side each day and make it. And the school that we were at, fantastic school. The principal met us every morning, and it was stellar support, but it wasn't working. And when we realized, I was trying to figure out, okay, if you do this, you're going to get this as a reward. The reward system didn't work. And I thought, whoa, would work for me. Let's find something that would be more valuable as a reward. It didn't work. And then I tried actually doing it for him. It didn't work. And we realized the only thing that was going to alleviate this was to just get rid of the homework. And that was whoa. So we did, and it made the house more sane. And it made us as parents more sane. But this was also during a time when we did not have a connection to the services that we were developing. We did not have the diagnoses that did develop. So in many respects, we were operating blindly and just trying to respond to the immediate needs, and managing the explosions was the biggest thing, because that was the most emotionally exhausting. And in fact, at that time, I was charting. I made my own little journal, and I would chart each day, did we go way up here into profound mania, or were we terribly in the depths of depression, or were we having explosions? Because the only thing I could do was write it down. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't identify it. I couldn't address it. I couldn't calm it. And I got really mad because I couldn't do anything, but I could write it down. So I grabbed that notebook and I wrote down what happened, ups and downs. And after a while, I had a book of behaviors, and it really helped me step back and see, I'm not just imagining this. This is what we're dealing with. So that was a time when documenting became super important.
Well, Suzette, since you mentioned services and that you weren't on the services that helped you at that time, I once heard an NPR segment about a study of poverty, and the segment was about how hard poor people have to work, and work meaning doing all of the bureaucratic things they need to do to get assistance and meet all the requirements to get assistance. And I can't remember the specifics, but it was just startling to learn what a lot of work it takes just to stay poor. There's not much love to save you in our systems. So, I know you also had to wrangle with the system a lot. So can you comment on the love or the lovelessness of our societal support?
There are some people who are engaged in support systems who can actually navigate, and they can fill out the forms, and they understand what the words mean. And there are some people, when they're sent a 6-page document to re-up their eligibility for CalFresh food stamps, and they can't understand why they have it in 6 different languages, or they don't understand when it says you don't have to do anything with this, just save it in your records, because it looks so official. And I think, wow, this is not a friendly system for people that have challenges. And the challenges don't make them bad or wrong or evil or immoral or stupid. It just makes them have the need for assistance. That's all. But we don't think about that. And right now, it's pretty much, I don't know, it's like the I don't even know how to say it, like the politics, the social, the energy, the everything that's going on is pushing people, everyone for themselves, which is the worst thing that people need, because we need to be together, we need to help each other, we need to knock on each other's doors, and especially for folks that just don't understand this stuff. I mean, my kid sisters just turned 57, right? 57 years old. Oh my God. She would not be able to navigate this at all. Even though she drives, she works once a week, she's able to do many, many things. There are some things that just her response is like her mouth opens, her brows furrow, and she goes, I don't know, and then goes on to her next thing. So we're really lucky that we take care of each other and we're able to manage, the paperwork and stuff. But it's difficult. My mom, who helps everybody, she's 84. So she's helpful, but she's still on her way out. So there's a lot of grief. So
Yeah, I was going to say grief and uncertainty can lead to fear. There's like lots of emotions to grapple with in here. And in closing, Suzette, we do live in a world where we compare ourselves to others, and you poignantly capture the things other people post on social media and how much that's not your life, and how much I guess people are kind of putting up a surface illusion when under the surface maybe all of us are struggling more than we confess. But there's this place where you write, when I scroll Facebook, friends, former colleagues, church members, and friends of friends all have a pesky habit of posting their Sundance Festival schedule of kitchen remodel or destination wedding, or their family cruise, or their high school graduate having to choose between UCLA and UCSD. Just once, I would like to see postings that a family like mine can relate to. My adult kid took a shower without help. We were able to leave our 30-year-old home alone while we went to a movie. My granddaughter took her medication without being reminded. My son was up until 3 a.m., but he slept till noon. Woohoo, my dog didn't eat shit today. All this stuff. So I was just curious about what prompted that, and about like how you look at these comparisons when you're struggling so acutely during some parts of this book and maybe even ongoingly.
yeah, because I still struggle, and sometimes I think, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have written that. But it's hard. It's really difficult. And my mom and I talk about that a lot. Right now we're able to have coffee every morning on the front porch and watch the sunrise. And that's just how I want my life to be. And sometimes we talk about things that we see. And I'm still connected to Facebook. It's really the only thing that I can check up on other people. But I see these things still, and I think, whoa, gosh, it's not like that for me. Whoa, gosh, wish I could do that. And then I think, God, would I even want to do that? No, I'd probably freak out if I got an invitation. Don't make me leave my house. I can't go to a destination, whatever, even if I'm invited. I'm just too anxious. But it's hard. It's really hard. And I realize that everybody's got a different perspective, and everybody needs to kind of show their best light. And I think, do I not have best light? No, it's just really different light. And as long as I can laugh each day about something ridiculous, because there's so much to choose from, right? As long as I can laugh, I can still check in on social media, and I can still see my beautiful people who are traveling and doing amazing things. And, good for them. Absolutely good for them. I'm glad they're doing it. It's nice that they're sharing it. It's not my life. And sometimes I get snarky and make fun of it.
As you should, Suzette.
Oh, sorry.
I like it. It's part of that upbeat tone that we mentioned earlier, so it's appreciated.
Well, the interesting thing is talking to you about the book, and I went through and Stacy at City Lights asked me to make a blurb for each chapter, and I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And I went through and I realized, oh, this looks like a real bummer. This kind of looks like a hard book to read. And I thought, but it was so much fun to write, and I laughed so hard, and it's really funny. So I guess that's the right part of it. It's a real honest trip around the sun, but maybe it's just my sense of humor, but I thought it was hilarious. And I hope that some of the depth doesn't get in the way of how funny it actually is, because that's the key.
You struck a really nice balance. I really appreciate it, Suzette. And even your title holds that little nuance. Love will save us, right?
Yeah.
So I hope so. And please hang in there. We're rooting for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Suzette.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with today's book trend. Well, Grant, I thought we'd cover some of what's been going on at Amazon in the past few weeks and months in today's book trend. Amazon is a frustrating retailer for publishers, in part because it's such an obsession for authors. I do get it, but still. So two things that I want to talk about today. Number one is that we've been seeing Amazon orders get smaller, which means that the orders they're taking out the gate and the replenishment orders have gotten smaller. And number two, Amazon has a new algorithm called A10, and it's just worth discussing because it's something authors should know about.
Yeah, where Amazon's concerned, it should be said, authors should be in the know, and there's a lot to know, so it's hard to stay on top of all these things. It is for me, definitely. But Brooke, let's start with what Simon & Schuster told you about Amazon's smaller buys and what's going on there.
Yeah, for sure. So Simon & Schuster is our distributor for listeners who might not know. So I had written to complain about a relatively new book being out of stock recently. And they wrote me back to explain essentially that their speculation is that Amazon's warehouses and staff are overloaded and don't have the space to keep larger stocks of books. Again, speculation, but they said they think that Amazon is using their trucks as mobile warehouses, basically to order and ship more quickly without having to keep so much stock on hand. It is a shift, and it's also hard to know whether it's about warehouse space or just treating books differently than they have in the past, because this is also a floated theory, which is that Amazon has historically ordered everything else that's not books in this way, or like not keeping large stocks or inventory in their warehouses other than things that people would really order regularly, like toothbrushes and groceries. And they did corroborate that this complaint that I was making was among the recent top complaints by publishers to Simon & Schuster. So clearly I'm not alone in recognizing that there's some kind of trend.
Well, yeah, it's so interesting and potentially troubling change for authors, because, of course, the reason Amazon has become such a juggernaut is because they're the ones who trained us to expect everything pretty much on demand. And I think 10 years ago, you might have gone to a website, and if you saw that something you wanted wasn't going to be immediately available, you might have purchased it. But now, with the messaging you see on Amazon, if something says it's not in stock or it's not going to make it to you tomorrow or the next day on Prime, consumers might not order it. And I imagine authors expect that their books are going to be, that readily available as well. I know I do.
Indeed, they do expect that. And I agree with you, Grant. I blame Amazon for this kind of expectation setting because they've really established the new rules. And then if they change the goalposts, it sucks a lot for publishers like me who are accountable to our authors because there's actually very little we can do. Publishers do not have a direct contact with Amazon, which is, something surprising to many authors. only our distributor does. And so they advocate for us, which is better than nothing. But Amazon is so big that they can really afford to be like, too bad, whatever complaint you might have about anything doesn't affect their bottom line. And I think this is called, the rules don't apply to us business model, basically. And it's a consequence of this kind of capitalistic world that we've created and nurtured here in the US. And so it's hard to look at because you're like, well, we set this up and then we prop it up.
Okay, so on that happy note, let's talk about the A10 algorithm. What is it? And what do authors need to know? And should I buy a t-shirt with A10 algorithm on it?
Yeah, I mean, the gist of this has to do with how Amazon makes books visible, and Kindlepreneurs Dave Chesson, who we had on the show a while back, does have a great video about this that authors can and should watch on his site, where he explains how this all works. It's basically a plug to authors to do metadata better. Metadata is really like all the data about your book. It includes your description and your keywords. If you do that well, then you will basically show up in higher, visibility and searches on Amazon. If you have a publisher, then their job is to look out for you and to do this on your behalf. But it is good for authors to know and understand this stuff, and then to consider if and how they might want to drive traffic to Amazon to push Amazon's algorithms, basically to reanalyze their books if that's necessary, but also just to be paying attention more broadly.
Yeah, this is the part of the book publishing business that's way in the weeds for a writer like me, who really just wants to show up and write every day. But I'm grateful that my publisher is hopefully paying attention to this, though I imagine that might be less true for backlist books than it is for new books. And I want to say that this updated A10 algorithm is very important because it determines which products appear and in what order when a customer, searches on Amazon. And obviously, every author wants to appear at the top of the searches. People do when they're looking for something specific, like a book, but they don't necessarily know that your book exists. That's why it's important to gain discoverability.
Yeah, 100%. And it's why keywords are so important, and optimizing your description with keywords are important so that people can discover your book. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and about A10, supposedly, according to the people in the know, it places a greater emphasis on external traffic, which means that social media, blogs, search engines will have a greater impact on which products appear and in what order. And there will be more emphasis on seller authority as well, which means that the seller's overall reputation, the feedback score, return rate, longevity will play a stronger role. And then finally, A10 is shifting more toward matching what users are actually looking for rather than purely ranking products that sell well or, pay to rank. And this alone seems like a good shift because there is, of course, a lot of pay for visibility schemes out there. And sure, it's business, but this can be, to the detriment of products and books where the visibility is so skewed and so many people are gaming the system that it's diluting the market.
Yeah, all of this is very interesting. It is totally in the weeds. With that said, we do recommend that if you're an author or an aspiring author, that you do at least keep these things on your radar. And if you're a buyer, someone who is purchasing things, which is all of us, it's good to know and to be conscious. Like, we have choices about where we buy, and we don't always have to buy on Amazon. We don't have to, keep paying for Jeff Bezos to have these giant events and parties. Instead, you can support your local bookstore, or you can buy on Bookshop, and just check your own impulse to need to have these things in like one day or two. Because if we were to train ourselves, to be on a more normal time schedule and get things in 5 to 7 days, we would probably feel like we had more buying options.
I know. Remember when 5 to 7 days used to just be normal? Like, order something, you got to wait for it. It's traveling across country. So yeah, Amazon definitely necessary evil as authors, and but that said, we have to pay attention to it, and it's driving more book sales than ever, more than any other retail. And yet, we as consumers, as you said, Brooke, we've got choices. So let's exercise those choices. That's really important to remember. So thank you, everybody, for making the choice to listen to Memoir Nation podcast. We're going to be right back next week with more exciting guests, more exciting topics. So keep writing, keep making choices, and we'll see you here next week.